In an era when courage was as priceless as gold, there rose a man whose name would echo through generations, Joshua, son of Nun. Hailing from the tribe of Ephraim, Joshua was far from just another face among those wandering through the wilderness. He stood out, marked by a bravery that quickened the pulse and skills that left many in awe. For 40 years, as the people of Israel crossed the scorching desert sands, Joshua emerged as a fierce warrior, a natural leader whose presence commanded respect and inspired admiration. Picture this. Under a relentless sun, with limited resources and constant lurking dangers, Joshua not only survived but thrived. His sword skills were legendary, yet there was more that set him apart, a calm, almost otherworldly composure in the face of chaos, as if he could foresee his enemies' moves before they made them. This gift for strategy, for keeping his head when others faltered, would later become crucial. But don't mistake Joshua for a man of mere muscle and tactics. His true strength stemmed from something far deeper, an unbreakable faith. In the harshness of the desert, amid doubts and relentless questioning, Joshua remained unwavering in his trust in the Lord. This faith propelled him forward, enabling him to see hope where others saw only hopelessness. But this wasn't blind faith. It was a confidence forged from lived experiences, from promises kept, and victories won against all odds. As the years passed, Joshua's reputation grew. He became not just a skilled warrior, but a figure of inspiration to all. Young men watched him with admiration, dreaming of one day becoming like him. Adults sought his advice, trusting in his wisdom. Even the elders, those who had seen it all, recognized the rare quality he possessed. Joshua seemed to carry a light within him, a spark that didn't just guide his own path but illuminated the way for those around him. And what a challenging path it was. The desert was unforgiving to the weak, but Joshua seemed to draw strength from its very hardships. Each obstacle he overcame became a lesson, each victory a confirmation of his calling. He fought not only physical battles, but spiritual ones as well. In an environment where despair easily took root, Joshua was like a beacon, a constant reminder of the divine promises that lay ahead. Yet he was still human. He had doubts, moments of vulnerability. But what set him apart was his way of confronting these challenges. He sought strength in prayer, consulted the wise, and reflected on divine laws. One of the greatest lessons we can take from Joshua's life is the power of perseverance mixed with faith. How many times do we, faced with our own deserts, think of giving up? Joshua teaches us that these are the very moments when we must hold on tighter to our beliefs, seeking strength in God to push through. Think about your own desert, a tough job, a challenging relationship. Whatever it is, know that like Joshua, you too can find the strength to endure. There's another fascinating aspect of Joshua's journey, his balance of strength and compassion. Yes, he was a fierce warrior, but he was also known for his empathy, his ability to listen and understand others. In a world that often values brute strength, Joshua reminds us of the importance of nurturing qualities of the heart. How can we apply this in our lives? Perhaps by starting with active listening, truly trying to understand before we judge. As the years in the desert drew to a close, Joshua faced a new test, the transition from follower to leader. The courage and skill he had shown would now be put to the ultimate trial. But one thing was clear. Everything he had endured in the desert, every battle, every doubt he had overcome, had prepared him for this moment. He was ready to lead his people into the promised land, to confront giants and to tear down walls. Reflecting on Joshua's journey, we might ask ourselves, what promised lands await us? What walls need breaking down in our own lives? Joshua's courage wasn't unique to him. Each of us has the potential to accomplish great things, to overcome challenges that seem impossible. But are we willing to develop our abilities, cultivate our courage, and strengthen our faith as Joshua did? When Moses gathered the leaders of Israel's tribes, a feeling of anticipation filled the air. The promised land of Canaan lay before them, but the unknown brings with it both excitement and fear. It was in this context that Joshua, alongside 11 other men, received a crucial mission: to scout the land that had been promised to them. Imagine the weight on these 12 men's shoulders. They weren't simply on a reconnaissance mission, but carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire nation. The journey was no easy task. For 40 days, Joshua and his companions traveled the length and breadth of Canaan, noting everything: the fertility of the soil, the fortifications of the cities, the customs of its people. Every detail mattered. Every piece of information could determine Israel's future. But while some saw only obstacles, Joshua saw opportunities. Where others were terrified of the giants inhabiting the land, he saw a chance for God to demonstrate his power. Upon their return, the 12 spies had drastically different perspectives. 10 of them painted a grim picture, a land that devoured its inhabitants. But Joshua, along with Caleb, stood apart. They didn't deny the challenges, but offered a different vision. "If the Lord is pleased with us," they said, "he will certainly bring us into this land and give it to us." This wasn't blind optimism. It was a conviction rooted in experience, in understanding God's character, and in the promises he had made. Joshua and Caleb's courage to stand against the majority teaches us a powerful lesson about perspective. How often do we face situations that seem insurmountable? A new job that feels overwhelming, a relationship needing healing, a dream that feels just out of reach. The difference between success and failure often lies in how we choose to see these situations. Joshua teaches us to look beyond the obstacles and focus on God's promises and power. But Joshua's faith wasn't simply about thinking positively. It was grounded in a deep understanding of God's character and his promises. He had witnessed the liberation from Egypt, seen the Red Sea part, experienced manna in the desert. For Joshua, the question was not if God could fulfill his promise, but rather how he would choose to do so. This teaches us that our faith grows as we reflect on how God has shown his faithfulness in our lives and in the lives of those around us. Joshua and Caleb's decision to stand up, even against the fearful majority, reveals another aspect of leadership. It takes courage to be the dissenting voice, especially when the majority is paralyzed by fear. In today's world, where the pressure to conform is intense, Joshua's example challenges us to remain firm in our convictions, especially when they align with God's will. Unfortunately, Joshua and Caleb's voices of faith were drowned out by fear and disbelief from the others. The people, swayed by the negative report from the 10 spies, rejected the idea of entering the promised land. This episode reminds us of the power of words and the importance of choosing carefully whom we listen to. In a world inundated with information, the loudest or most popular voices aren't always the wisest or the truest. The consequences of this lack of faith were severe. God decreed that the generation of doubters would wander in the desert for 40 years until every adult who had rejected his promise had passed away. Only Joshua and Caleb, among all the adults who left Egypt, would live to enter the promised land. This part of the story serves as a reminder that our choices have consequences, sometimes impacting not only ourselves but future generations. For Joshua, those 40 years became a time of learning, growth, and preparation. He watched as an entire generation passed away, but his faith and vision remained unshaken. What an example of perseverance! Many of us would give up if our dreams were delayed for so long, but Joshua teaches us that sometimes the road to our personal promised land can be long and winding. The key is to keep our eyes on the promise, trusting that God's timing is always perfect. Reflecting on this chapter of Joshua's life challenges us to examine our own lives. What are the promised lands that God has placed before us? What giants make us want to retreat? Joshua's example urges us to face our fears with faith, to see possibilities where others see only obstacles. Perhaps now is the time to take that step of faith you've been putting off, to believe that with God the impossible becomes possible. The transition of leadership is a pivotal moment in any story, and for Israel, it was no different. After decades under the guidance of Moses, the people faced a significant change. Moses, the liberator, the lawgiver, the man who spoke with God face to face, was nearing the end of his earthly journey, and who would take his place? The answer was none other than Joshua, the faithful assistant, the brave spy, the man who had shown unwavering faith. Moses, guided by God, began preparing Joshua for this transition long before the actual handover. Imagine the scene. Moses, bearing the weight of years and responsibility, calling Joshua aside for private conversations. He shared his wisdom, his experiences, his fears, and his hopes. This wasn't merely about transferring knowledge, it was about shaping the character of a leader. Joshua wasn't just gaining information, he was being molded by Moses' experiences, prepared for the weighty task that awaited him. One of the most powerful moments of this transition took place publicly, before the eyes of all Israel. Moses, understanding the gravity of the moment, anointed Joshua as his successor. He laid his hands on Joshua, a gesture rich with meaning, symbolizing a transfer of authority and responsibility. For Joshua, it must have been a profoundly moving experience, and likely intimidating. Leading a vast, often rebellious people was not a task for the faint-hearted. Yet the final confirmation of Joshua's role didn't come from Moses, but from God himself. The Lord spoke directly to Joshua, affirming his choice and his promises. "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you." These powerful words weren't only a validation of Joshua's position, but a promise of God's continuous presence and support. This transition offers us lessons in patience and preparation. Joshua wasn't thrust into leadership suddenly. He had years of guidance under Moses' mentorship. In our lives, whether in work, family, or community, how can we prepare ourselves for future responsibilities? What skills do we need to develop, and what mentors should we seek? Another significant lesson from this transition is the importance of public affirmation. Moses didn't just prepare Joshua behind the scenes. He publicly declared him as the new leader, solidifying Joshua's authority and facilitating the people's acceptance of him. In our own leadership roles, or when we're passing the torch, we should aim for clarity and public support to ensure a smooth transition. Joshua's humility throughout this process also stands out. Despite being chosen for such an honorable position, he didn't boast or act with arrogance. Instead, he approached his role with a deep sense of responsibility and dependence on God. This is a reminder for all of us. True leadership isn't about power or status, but about service and a higher calling. Joshua's example calls us to lead with humility, remembering that our purpose is to serve rather than be served. God's support for Joshua wasn't merely a comforting notion, it became his source of courage and confidence. Knowing he wasn't alone, that he had the backing of the Almighty, was essential as he stepped into his role. This encourages us to seek alignment with God's purpose in our own lives. When we do, we find strength beyond our abilities, knowing that challenges may come, but we won't face them alone. The transition from Moses to Joshua also teaches us about the wisdom of knowing when to step aside. Moses recognized that his time as leader was drawing to a close, and he embraced the need for fresh leadership. In our own lives, this requires humility and wisdom, understanding that every season has a purpose and that sometimes stepping back is as important as leading forward. For the people of Israel, this transition was a bittersweet moment. They faced the sadness of losing Moses, the one who had guided them so faithfully, but also the hope and expectation that came with Joshua's leadership. Change, even when necessary and positive, can be challenging. Joshua's story invites us to approach transitions with both grace and confidence, trusting that new beginnings can bring new blessings. With Moses' era behind them, the people of Israel now stood at the edge of the Jordan River, their promised land in sight. This was Joshua's first major test as the nation's leader. The challenge was immense, leading an entire people across a raging river, and at flood season no less. Imagine the apprehension, the hesitation. The Jordan River was overflowing its banks, a formidable barrier that seemed impossible to cross. In the face of this daunting task, Joshua demonstrated the leadership qualities that Moses had instilled in him. He was not shaken by the size of the challenge. Instead, he turned to God for guidance, then communicated those instructions to the people with clarity and confidence. "Sanctify yourselves," he told them, "for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." His words were more than a directive, they were a promise, a reminder that they were about to witness the extraordinary. The instructions were precise and, by human standards, unconventional. The priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant were to enter the waters first. Imagine the scene, the priests advancing toward the churning river, bearing the holiest symbol of their faith. The people watched, a mix of fear and anticipation in their hearts. What would happen when the priests' feet touched the water? What followed was nothing short of miraculous. As soon as the priests' feet touched the river's edge, the waters stopped flowing. The current from upstream gathered into a towering wall, while the downstream waters receded entirely, leaving a dry path through the riverbed. The people crossed on dry ground, an event that didn't just demonstrate God's power, but also affirmed Joshua's leadership. Just as God had parted the Red Sea for Moses, he now parted the Jordan for Joshua, showing all the people that he was with Joshua just as he had been with Moses. This crossing marked more than a physical transition. It was a defining moment for Israel. It symbolized the end of a wandering era and the beginning of a new phase in their history. For many of the people, especially those born in the desert, this was their first time stepping onto the land promised to their ancestors. Joshua, ever mindful of the need to preserve this moment for future generations, ordered 12 men, one from each tribe, to take stones from the riverbed. These stones would serve as a memorial in their camp, a physical reminder of the miracle they had just witnessed. Joshua understood the importance of remembering God's faithfulness. He knew that future generations would ask, "What do these stones mean?" and that the people could then recount how the Jordan River had stopped flowing for the Ark of the Covenant. This act of setting up a memorial was more than a way to honor a miraculous event. It was a way to anchor the faith of those yet to come. Joshua's foresight reminds us that faith must be nurtured and that the stories of divine provision and guidance should be passed down from generation to generation. This event also served to solidify Joshua's leadership. Scripture tells us that on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they respected him all the days of his life, just as they had respected Moses. This public affirmation of Joshua's authority was crucial, uniting the people under his leadership as they prepared to face the challenges of conquest. After crossing the Jordan, the people of Israel faced a new reality. The desert was behind them, and before them lay the promised land. But they knew that the journey wasn't over. Great challenges awaited. Fortified cities, powerful armies, and established peoples would stand in their way. Yet, as they stood on the banks of the Jordan, their feet still damp from the miraculous crossing, they felt renewed hope and confidence. They had seen God's power firsthand, and they had a leader in Joshua who guided them with both faith and courage. The next challenge was Jericho, a formidable fortress with walls that seemed impenetrable. Conquering this city would require more than just skill in battle. Joshua, however, true to his character, sought divine guidance rather than relying solely on human strategies. The instructions he received were as unusual as they were clear. No siege engines, no weapons, no direct assault. Instead, God commanded the people to march around the city once a day for 6 days, led by the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant and blowing trumpets. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, and after a final trumpet blast, the entire people were to shout. Imagine what it must have been like for the inhabitants of Jericho, watching this strange procession day after day. Perhaps at first they laughed or even scoffed at the Israelites, thinking their marching would accomplish nothing. But as the days went on, the tension must have built. What did it all mean? What would happen next? For Joshua and the people, this strategy was a profound test of faith and obedience. It defied all logic and military strategy. Marching in silence day after day must have tested their patience. Some likely questioned the plan, perhaps wondering if Joshua's leadership was sound. Yet Joshua remained resolute, trusting completely in the divine command. On the 7th day, as instructed, they marched around Jericho 7 times. At the sound of the long trumpet blast, Joshua gave the command, and the people shouted as one, declaring, "The Lord has given you the city." In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The walls of Jericho, those seemingly impenetrable fortifications, collapsed entirely. The city fell, not because of human might, but through faith and obedience to God. This victory wasn't just a military conquest. It was a testament to the power of faith. For the Israelites, it confirmed that God was indeed with them, fulfilling his promise to deliver the land into their hands. And for the surrounding nations, it sent a clear message. No wall was too high, no city too strong, to stand against a people whose God could bring down walls with a shout. After the triumph at Jericho, Joshua gave precise instructions on how to proceed. Everything in the city was to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab, the woman who had helped the Israelite spies, and her family would be spared. This demonstrated Joshua's commitment to honoring divine commands and keeping his word. The conquest of Jericho was not only a decisive moment in Israel's campaign for the Promised Land, but also a powerful lesson in trusting and obeying God, even when his methods seemed to defy human reason. For Joshua personally, Jericho's fall must have been a profound affirmation of his calling and leadership. He had led his people across the Jordan, and now to their first major victory in the Promised Land. His faith and obedience were bearing visible fruit, reinforcing his confidence in the path God had set before him. Following the miraculous victory at Jericho, the story of Joshua took a darker turn, revealing the serious consequences of disobedience and the importance of faithfulness to God's commands. After Jericho's fall, the Israelites faced a smaller city named Ai. Given Jericho's monumental defeat, the people expected a swift and easy victory over Ai. But something went wrong. The Israelites suffered a surprising defeat, one that left Joshua and the entire nation stunned and discouraged. Joshua sought answers, and he turned to God, pleading for an explanation. It was then that the truth was revealed. Someone had disobeyed the Lord's command by taking items from Jericho that were supposed to be consecrated to God. This disobedience didn't just affect the individual, it had consequences for the entire community. Through a process of discernment, the culprit was identified, Achan, an Israelite who had hidden some of Jericho's treasures for himself. Joshua, ever committed to upholding God's commands, knew that Achan's actions couldn't go unaddressed. This was no small decision. The punishment was severe, but Joshua understood the importance of obedience and accountability, both for Achan and for the entire nation. This painful episode served as a stark reminder that choices, even those made in secret, carry weight and can affect others. Once the sin was dealt with, Joshua once again led his people to conquer Ai. This time they achieved victory. The lesson was clear. God's favor required not only strength and courage, but also complete faithfulness. Joshua's response to this setback demonstrated his unwavering commitment to God's instructions, even when it required difficult choices. He showed the people that obedience was paramount, not only in large battles but in small acts of faithfulness. With Ai defeated, Israel continued its campaign across Canaan. As Joshua led the people from one victory to another, he made sure they never lost sight of their spiritual foundation. He upheld sacred practices and traditions, strengthening the people's connection to their heritage. For instance, after entering Canaan, Joshua made sure that circumcision was performed, a covenant sign that had been neglected during their years in the desert. He also led the people in celebrating Passover, reconnecting them to the story of their deliverance from Egypt. These acts were more than rituals. They were powerful reminders of God's promises and the miraculous ways he had delivered his people. Throughout these conquests, Joshua adhered to every instruction given by God. When the tribes began to claim their inheritance, Joshua followed a meticulous and divinely guided process, ensuring that each tribe received its rightful portion. For Joshua, distributing the land wasn't a mere administrative task. It was the fulfillment of God's promises to the patriarchs. This process wasn't without its challenges, but Joshua's wisdom and fairness helped maintain peace and unity. Some tribes, like the tribe of Joseph, felt that their assigned territory was insufficient. Rather than dismiss their concerns, Joshua encouraged them to clear additional land and to have faith in their ability to overcome the remaining Canaanites. Joshua showed that true leadership doesn't mean avoiding challenges, but facing them head-on with a spirit of trust and persistence. His response empowered the people to expand and develop their territories, further cementing his legacy as a wise and just leader. A memorable moment during the distribution of the land involved Caleb, Joshua's old companion and fellow spy. Caleb, now 85 years old, still possessed the same faith and vigor he had shown when he first explored Canaan. He approached Joshua with a request to claim a specific portion of land, one that was still inhabited by strong and powerful people. Caleb's faith had not diminished with age. If anything, it had grown stronger. Joshua honored Caleb's request, and Caleb went on to conquer his land. This act was not only a testament to Caleb's courage, but also a powerful reminder of God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. In handling these various land distributions, Joshua demonstrated sensitivity to the needs and requests of his people, while also upholding God's instructions. He understood that fairness and transparency were essential to fostering unity among the tribes. By ensuring that the land was divided justly, Joshua laid the groundwork for a nation built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Once the land was distributed, Israel transitioned from a wandering people to a settled nation. Each tribe now had its own territory to cultivate and protect. This was the beginning of a new phase in Israel's story, a momentous step toward becoming a unified people. For Joshua, it must have been a deeply satisfying accomplishment. He had not only led his people in the conquest of the land, but had also ensured that each family received its inheritance, a tangible realization of a promise made generations ago. Joshua's leadership wasn't limited to military victories or territorial administration. He understood the importance of spiritual continuity, and he worked to solidify Israel's faith in God. Toward the end of his life, Joshua gathered the leaders of Israel at Shechem for one final address. This was more than a farewell. It was a chance to leave a lasting spiritual legacy, to reaffirm Israel's commitment to God. In his final speech, Joshua recounted Israel's history, from Abraham's calling to their present moment. This wasn't just a historical recap. It was a powerful reminder of God's enduring faithfulness and the countless ways he had intervened on behalf of his people. Joshua's words carried the weight of someone who had walked with God, who had witnessed his miracles, and who had seen his promises fulfilled. Joshua's closing message included a profound challenge: choose this day whom you will serve. This was no rhetorical question, it was a decisive call to action. Joshua urged the people to consciously renew their commitment to God, to make a choice that would shape their future. And he didn't just issue this challenge as a leader. He led by example, declaring, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." With these words, Joshua set a powerful standard, reminding everyone that faith is a personal as well as communal commitment. The people responded with enthusiasm, pledging to serve the Lord. But Joshua, wise and experienced, knew the seriousness of such a promise. He warned them of the gravity of their commitment, reminding them of God's holiness and the consequences of infidelity. He didn't want their response to be superficial or short-lived. To seal this commitment, Joshua recorded their pledge in the book of the law of God and set up a large stone as a witness. This act served as a physical reminder of their covenant, a symbol that would endure through generations. Joshua's legacy was profound and enduring. His example of faith and obedience set a standard for future leaders and for all who sought to follow God faithfully. Throughout his life, Joshua had shown extraordinary courage, not only in battle but in staying true to his convictions, even when it meant standing against the majority. His actions and teachings became a cornerstone of Israel's identity, shaping how future generations would understand faithfulness and leadership. One of the most remarkable aspects of Joshua's legacy is his consistency. From his early days as a spy to his final moments as Israel's leader, he maintained an unwavering commitment to God. His leadership was marked by humility, courage, and a deep understanding of the importance of obedience. Unlike many leaders who waver in their convictions over time, Joshua remained steadfast, his faith unshaken by success or adversity. Joshua's legacy extended beyond his own generation. The Bible tells us that Israel served the Lord throughout Joshua's lifetime and even after, as long as the elders who had known him were alive. This statement speaks to Joshua's lasting influence, a testament to the impact of a life lived with integrity and purpose. He didn't merely talk about faithfulness, he embodied it, and his example inspired those around him to do the same. Joshua's leadership also provided a model of service. He didn't seek personal glory or power. His focus was always on fulfilling God's purpose for the nation. His leadership was defined by his willingness to serve rather than be served, a quality that earned him the respect of his people and the blessing of God. At the heart of Joshua's legacy is the understanding that true greatness doesn't come from personal achievements, but from faithful obedience to God's will. He showed that an individual dedicated to God could bring transformation not just to his own life, but to an entire nation. Joshua's life continues to inspire believers and leaders today, reminding us of the importance of faith, courage, and obedience on our spiritual journey. Joshua's story challenges us to reflect on our own lives. How often do we face obstacles that seem like walls of Jericho, challenges that feel insurmountable? Joshua's example encourages us to respond with faith and obedience, believing that with God, even the most intimidating barriers can be overcome. As we think about the rivers we need to cross or the walls that stand before us, Joshua's story reminds us that when we walk in faith, God can and will make a way. His life also emphasizes the importance of consistency in our faith. Joshua's journey wasn't just about grand miracles and battles. It was about daily faithfulness, staying true to God in the small moments as well as the big ones. How can we cultivate this same consistency in our lives? What small acts of faith and obedience can we practice today that will shape our future? Finally, Joshua's legacy challenges us to think beyond ourselves. Just as he sought to leave a spiritual legacy for future generations, we too are called to build something that lasts. What values and examples are we passing down to those who come after us? What kind of legacy are we leaving? Let this story provoke you to action. Don't let Joshua's journey remain words on a page or an ancient tale. Think about what step you can take today, inspired by his example. Perhaps it's confronting a fear, forgiving someone, or taking a step toward a long-postponed dream. Whatever it may be, remember, just as Joshua wasn't alone in his journey, neither are you.